Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's staff chat. My name is Priscilla Andrews. I'm the clinical manager at the Cancer Wellness Center. For those of you who are here for the first time for the Cancer Wellness Center staff chat, this series was designed as a way to give you guys an opportunity to hear two colleagues discussing issues and concerns and topics that are of interest to the cancer community. And I am very grateful today to have with me my colleague, Debbie Kronenberger, who is my longtime office mate, although we're working from home. You can see her and you can see my desk at the office actually behind her because she's on site. And she also serves as the center's wellness program coordinator. So Debbie, thank you so much for being with me here today.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, one of Debbie's expertise, and she really is our resident expert at the center, is on mindfulness. And so I'm so glad to have you here to talk about this subject, which I think lots of discussion, airplay, you hear a lot about mindfulness kind of now in the sort of general culture, although I will say you were a little ahead of the curve on all of that. So, before we kind of jump in to talk about what is mindfulness and how can it help the people that are participants in the Cancer Wellness Center community, I'm curious just on a personal level, professional level, what drew you to mindfulness as you got your start?
Sure. It really is was a personal journey for me and of mine. And it began a long time ago. I aged myself when I say I started thinking about mindfulness, not really knowing what it was. And there wasn't like all the mindfulness chatter back then, but it was in the 80s. And I was walking down the street in New York City. I remember vividly where it was. It was at the corner of 52nd and First Avenue. And someone, it was a crowded corner, everybody rushing here and there. And someone bumped me, bumped my shoulder, as sometimes happens when you're in a big crowd. And I looked up, kind of jolted awake, and from being completely in my head. And this person looked at me and said, "Why are you so afraid?" And it just stopped me in my tracks. And not because it was the first time that I'd heard it. It was not. I'd heard it before, that I walked around in the world with an expression on my face of being afraid or worried. But for some reason, that time it got my attention.
Sure.
And I literally stood there, and I'm sure many people in our audience remember Mary Tyler Moore. It was my Mary Tyler Moore moment, where she throws her beret up in the air. It was my Mary Tyler Moore moment.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm too intimate.
Yeah,
I know.
And it in that moment in my head, I said, I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to live my life afraid, because in that moment I realized that I was, and I'll pretty much do anything not to be. And so that started my journey, where I began to discover yoga and meditation and the Eastern philosophies, and then mindfulness and how it dovetailed with contemporary psychology. And that began the journey.
Yeah.
And that's how I began to come to think in that way, and also integrate that into my clinical practice.
There's so much I love about that story. I just want to say, because I think there is sometimes that happenstance nature of change, of like, there's just that sort of straw that broke the camel's back that just pushes us to change. And that feeling of like, I think that probably people in our audience can appreciate, which is when you just get to a point where like something has to be different. And the other thing is, we're human. Therapists are human, right? We do our own work that we hope to bring to the work we do with our clients, which is just so beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing that journey. And now we get to benefit from those years of personal investigation that have really become a professional expertise.
Yeah. So many times people say to me, this is thinking in this way is so hard. It's so much work. And I say, yeah, it is. I agree. But I wouldn't be asking you to do it if I didn't know what that was like.
Yeah.
And that it is possible to begin to, in small doses, begin to think and live in this way. So it comes from a clinical belief in the approach, but also from personal experience.
Which I think is what makes it so powerful, right? As therapists, when we really are invested in the work that we do, I think that is sort of the special sauce, if you will. But and I think you mentioned in it as you were talking about your experience getting engaged with mindfulness, of this movement of starting it back in the 80s. It sounds like, when mindfulness wasn't everywhere, right? And now it's this sort of buzzy word, it's cliche to a certain degree. I think people hear the word, they don't always know what it is. If I bring it up with clients, they're kind of like, yeah, I've heard about it. And some people are really interested, and some people are like, it's kind of all over the place.
Mhm.
But they don't really understand it.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, could you just sort of give an introduction of, like, kind of what is mindfulness? Where did it start? Kind of when we say mindfulness, especially from a clinical perspective, what does that mean?
Yeah. So just remind me, you asked a bunch of different things. So just remind me if I skip one.
I like to give you like a lot of room to talk. So you don't
I
have to
should
answer
have written down, but I
I
was
know, right?
like,
um,
slow down. I didn't get all that.
yeah.
So,
I got to be more mindful in the way that I ask my questions. I guess at bottom line is, what is mindfulness and where did it start? Where did it come from?
great. So mindfulness is a way of thinking. It's a discipline, right? And there's many different definitions of mindfulness. One of them, and I'm paraphrasing, is it is a non-judgmental presence in the present, or a non-judgmental consciousness in the present. And we do have to make a promise to ourselves, right? We have to say one of our goals in mindfulness is to reduce suffering or to live peacefully. And so that has to be kind of our overarching strategic plan for our life. And much like I referred to back in my personal story, you have to make that commitment. So back then I was just like, I'll pretty much do anything not to live worried and afraid all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And when I finally just stumbled upon yoga and meditation and Vipassana meditation, which is mindfulness meditation, I just stumbled on it. But it was a model that provided a roadmap for me to live peacefully. And it really is a model, and it really is a roadmap. It's not some airy fairy, random thing that just happens. It is a practice, and it is a discipline, and requires work if you want to change the way your brain works, right? And especially change your responses to the environment or conditions.
Yeah.
Mindfulness, this way of thinking, started thousands of years ago with the Vedic traditions. It is a philosophy and informs Buddhism. So Buddhism was born out of this kind of thinking, and is really a spiritual tradition. As meditations were developed, humans developed meditations. Who knows really? But as a way of connecting to something beyond our worries and concerns, beyond our tendency of the mind to be a certain way. And that was a way, say, with connecting with the divine for some spiritual or religious traditions. It was also a way of becoming closer to God through prayer or the rosary. Those are all meditations. And so what we find is, and then contemporary psychology picked it up, right? So every single spiritual tradition, every single religion has some mindfulness thinking in it or philosophy in it to quiet the mind so that we can open up the heart. With the idea that at the core of it all is a heart of love and compassion. And if we can access that and live out of that feeling or state, that it's really peaceful and beautiful. And the idea also was that if we are peaceful and our heart is open, that we can connect with the mystery, God, the divine, the spirit, nature, you know, whatever it is for you. Eventually, and this is very psychological in nature, because you realize that you can't connect with those things. Not only can you not connect with the divine or spiritual or you know, aspirational things, you can't really connect with each other either. If you're feeling anxious or depressed or angry, what you're really connected to, right? And in the field they call it an attachment. What you're really connected to is your reactivity, right? So you're reacting to the world rather than responding to the world in a thoughtful way, right?
Yeah.
And our emotions, we get attached to these responses, like these reactions, we get attached to those. That's a kind of catchphrase in mindfulness, attachments. And they kind of run the show, they drive the car. But when we're not, and we flow through these situations, and we're doing it in a present or a conscious or a thoughtful way, then who we really are is driving the car.
Yeah.
So contemporary psychology began to think, wow, you know, this is pretty powerful. This is a powerful philosophy and highly psychological in nature. And let's think how we can apply it. And then over the years, we have. And it's become very secular and psychological and clinical. And there's, you know, many models and tools and practices that have come out of it that are beyond just the thinking about being mindful and practicing meditation. And meditation, the practice of meditation is the way we build our mindfulness skill.
Yeah.
Can
I ask a question here?
Yes.
Because I think something that you said connects to a question I had, and I think that this sort of gets at it, which is, you know, I think when you talk about the idea of mindfulness being a practice, and I'm kind of checking in, I think that idea of the practice is you're doing the meditation, you're doing the I don't know the right word here, so maybe you can fill it in, because you just said something that it's like we do these things so that we can translate it outside of the time that we're doing it, right? The practice is we're not just doing the 10-minute Headspace app and the 10-minute Headspace app. Okay, I did it. I'm done with my mindfulness for the day. All done, right? That's going to carry me throughout the next 23 hours and 50 minutes.
Yeah.
The idea is we're doing the practice so that when we're living our life, when we're stuck in traffic, when our kid is yelling at us, whatever it is, we can have that same presence in the moment to stay connected to that sort of deeper experience of self rather than the reactivity that we may experience. Am I getting, when you talk about practice, that's what you're talking about when you talk about practice?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And really such an important one, because you know, there's kind of a skill building set in mindfulness, but the definition of mindfulness is really about an ability to pay attention to the present moment which we almost always are not doing, and remain peaceful, right? To control the tendencies of our mind to just create a stressful situation. Okay. Now, many people say to me, many people say to me, mindfulness doesn't work for me. And I always smile because it's not something that works for you. And I think there's a little misunderstanding because there's a very popular program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, MBSR.
Mhm.
And they think that mindfulness is a stress reduction technique. It's not the same as, say, do your breathing to calm yourself down, which is lovely and great and a great skill for people to have. Nothing wrong with the stress reduction technique, but it's really not mindfulness. Although mindfulness, when you are skilled in this way of thinking, reduces stress across your life. And
Yeah.
so when you're doing the Headspace app, nothing wrong with the Headspace app. It's a great app. It teaches you a lot of different skills.
We're not throwing shade here.
What?
We're not throwing shade here.
That's right. I don't even, what does that mean? I'm behind. You have
It means
to
we're not hating on Headspace. This isn't
Okay.
about hating on Headspace. We're just differentiating what Headspace is versus.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So what we say about mindfulness is that it is a way of practicing non-attachment. It's a way of going with the flow of your life in a peaceful way, right? Being aware of your life in a peaceful way. And it is the practice helps us integrate, the practice of meditation helps us integrate the skills that we learn in meditation into our everyday life.
Yeah.
So if you have a tendency to be kind of future oriented and you are, which would be a more anxious personality, and you say to yourself, I don't really want to do that. You know, that's really a lot of suffering. I'd so much rather be peaceful. Then the first skill you would learn, and the first skill that everyone learns, is how to be more present in the present. And we do that through a certain kind of meditation. And then we move on to beginning to notice what happens not only in our tendency to be future oriented or even past oriented, which is about stuff that already happened, right? But when we get better at being here, then we can begin to notice or be aware of our experience in this moment, right? And we learn that through meditation. And we practice that in meditation because our mind does what it's gonna do. And we begin to notice what it does as we sit in meditation. And then we refocus our attention on the present moment, right? And then we learn how to create the skill of being the observer or the witness, or have a consciousness around the tendency of our mind to want to do certain things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then what we do is we notice it. We don't judge it. I mean, what's there to judge? It's just what happens.
It's doing what
right?
I know when I took a mindfulness course, the instructor said, your mind is like a little puppy and its job is to just do this thing. And we're just noticing that and like bringing it back.
And when we bring it back and we practice being non-reactive to it, we're training our brain.
Yeah.
That's the hard part, because you've been thinking like this your entire life. So now we're saying to your brain, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this and do it this way.
Yeah.
And we do that in meditation over and over and over and over. I don't know. My kids are grown, but when they were little, and maybe this was your experience also, whenever we would go to the shopping mall, boy, how long has it been since we've been to the shopping mall? We would get to the shopping mall, I'd take them out of the carriage or whatever, and they would literally run to the escalator, right?
Yes.
Or the candy store.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And I'd have to bring them back. I say, no, 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 we're not going to do that. We're going to
Yeah.
walk with mommy, and maybe we'll go have a little lunch or go to the store that you like. And then they'd run away again in opposite directions. And then I have to gather them together again. And as they were babies and toddlers and small children, we would do these things over and over and over again. And finally they realized, oh, the escalator is dangerous, right, for us to do by ourselves until we're bigger kids. And the candy store is a solid no for now. Not sure why.
Mom, it's afternoon somewhere. Come on.
Yeah. And so, but that repetition, and our mind, I say that on purpose because our mind is like a busy toddler.
Yeah.
Right. It just goes to the next most attractive thing, exploring this, that, but it needs something to anchor to, because when it's unanchored, it creates a lot of stress for us. It just has a tendency not to create peaceful thoughts and feelings, although sometimes it does. And so then the practice is to say, no, 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 no. Let's come back here, refocus the attention on what's happening here, and we'll then continue our meditation. That's the practice. And it kind of naturally begins. The more you practice, it naturally begins to integrate itself into our lives.
And I think the thing that's, to me, is really exciting is that as neuroscience continues to advance, I think our understanding of the neurobiology of what you're talking about, right, that was instinctive, right, thousands and thousands of years ago, they were not putting people in MRI machines to try to understand what was going on in the brain. But now we can do that and understand what happens in our system when our mind gets pulled away in that way, and what happens in our system when we can stay present in the moment. And I think some of the language that I use, and I'm not a mindfulness person, but I think there's a lot of, we talked before, I think there's a lot of different orientations that have mindfulness just tied up in it, is like, can you be flexible? How flexible is your system that when you notice that your mind, the toddler goes to the escalator, do you have the flexibility to bring it back? Or is your mind just like on the escalator going up and you have no way of turning back around, and oh my God, all of a sudden they're in the Lego store and how did they get there?
Stuff around.
Exactly, right? Like, because the idea of like, can I start to be aware that my mind is doing that? Because my mind is going to do that. And that's not necessarily like, don't cut yourself off. Because I think something that happens when I talk about mindfulness with people, or kind of mindfulness influenced practices, is I can't do it. I can't do it. I sit down to meditate and my mind goes all over the place and my mind's thinking about things and I always forget about breathing, and they get anxious about their like inability to do it. And I'm like, first I'm like, let's take a beat, because your mind is just doing the thing that your mind does and the thing that your mind has learned to do. And so can we exercise it in a different way? So great that you're aware that it's doing that being important, because when you're aware, can we be flexible enough that we can find a different state, a different place to return to?
Yeah. I think, first of all, there's a lot of really great research out there. Wonderful. The Center for Mindfulness in Medicine at the University of Massachusetts. There's a Center for Mindfulness at University of Wisconsin. The work of Matthew Ricard is like really amazing science regarding what happens in the brain. Really cool research done on Buddhist monks who've been studying mindfulness their entire lives. And of course, they're highly, highly skilled, and how their brains differ from ours. So a lot of great research if you like to nerd out like you and I like to do. The beginning, I when I work in my class, when I teach my first class, I say to people, we talk about present moment focus, and I say to people, look, here we work in the cancer community, and cancer activates us emotionally. It's a scary thing, and rightfully so. But what that illustrates to me is that life is precious, and cancer has the potential to shorten our life or impact our life in a way that we aren't happy about, right? And so, but so much of our life is spent projecting into the future or the past, which isn't real at all, right? What is the future? It's just some thought that we worry about. What if? And the past also, like, laws of the universe say we don't get to know what's going to happen in the future, and we don't get to change the past. Although there are some choice moments from high school that I could kind of wish on for a bit. But the idea is that let's live in the present, because that's what we have. And really crazy, we humans, like, we're so projected future and past, we kind of miss out on our lives. So what better way of honoring our life is by just, I say to people, if you learn from me only to be more present in the present,
yeah,
I'm happy. If that's if that's all the time I have with you, and we can really focus on that, great, because this is where life is.
yeah.
But
well, can I say, and I think one of the things too that I think is valuable, even just thinking about it from like that sort of philosophy standpoint, right, is can you bring awareness that you're not? Are you even aware of the fact that you're not living in the present? Because I think a lot of people, like, it's like that moment you had on the street corner, which I think was such a great illustration of like, oh, I'm not here, I'm somewhere else. And I think a lot of people, they don't, like, that to me is the first step, to just recognize I'm not here, I'm over there, or I'm back there.
yes, it absolutely is the first step. And you'll find, like you mentioned, that there's pieces of mindfulness in almost every major therapeutic approach that we are looking at today, that we use in therapy today. And you'll find that almost across the board, therapists use present moment focus as a way of helping people with anxiety and depression, but primarily anxiety. Why? Because anxiety, unless, I always say to my students, the present moment is almost always peaceful unless it's not. And so if you really think about that, we walk around in this world not peaceful. But if we bring ourselves back to here, it's usually pretty peaceful, even though there's a whole lot going on out there. And if you think about this moment where all of us are listening, where you and I are talking, but our people are listening, there's a ton going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're really focused on this, all of that other stuff kind of fades away, right? And it's a pretty peaceful moment.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where we begin. And it's not easy. People always say to me, it's so hard, it's so hard, it's so hard. And what I always say to my students is, it's like if you decided to learn how to knit or play the guitar or cook, right? It would take time and practice, and you'd have to focus on it and read books and do experiential stuff, right? Like, you can't learn how to cook if you don't cook. right? And how many times when you were learning to cook was it a complete disaster?
Never. It's perfect all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, of course. Yes.
And and think about the guitar, right? Think
Sure.
about how hard playing the guitar is, or the piano, and how long it took you, say if you tried to, or if you are a musician and you learned your first piece or your first chord and the notes, and how much practice that took. And that's why we call this approach a practice, because it takes practice. And the more we practice, just like any other skill, and that's why I call it training for the brain, just like any other skill, the more we practice, the better at it we get. And what brings us back is just like any other change. Like we have to, the stages of change, people have to really want it. They have to have that seminal moment where they say, I'll pretty much do anything. Right? I'll pretty much do anything. But even if they're not ready for that, and they just begin to think about it, and they have moments, say in the car, like think about, have you gotten to, well, I don't know if you've been to the grocery store lately, but even in the past, if you went to the grocery store, you drove to work, or it was you were doing something that you do a lot, right? How many times have you gotten to the grocery store, for example, and been like, oh my God, I have no idea how I got here, right? And so where were you?
Yeah.
Right. And that's more of an existential question that we can have over lunch sometime. Maybe there's another dimension where our consciousness goes, right? I always wonder about that. It's like a Star Trek kind of question, like, where are you? Right. And what we don't know, our brain goes off into thought. Our body is here, but our brain is off doing something else. Right. And in that moment, we miss it. We miss whatever it was that was here. So there's a question that I always teach my students, and it's what's appropriate for me to do in this moment because I want to live peaceful. It's really important because we have to commit to wanting to live peacefully, because this is a practice. This is a life practice. And then we have to ask ourselves, what's appropriate for this moment? So in the example, driving to the grocery store, well, what would be appropriate? Well, the most peaceful thing would be to pay attention to your driving, right? Because that's what it requires.
Sure.
Right? But that's what's appropriate. That's what the conditions require.
And I think this idea of practice, I just want to pick up on that for a moment here. I think one of the struggles that I witness is, I think because we can tend to be goal oriented, there being this idea that when we do something like mindfulness, that we're accomplishing a goal and we're going to cross it off of our list, that we're going to practice, and after 10 weeks we're going to have done it, and we've done the mindfulness and we know how to do it, and we're all done and we don't have to do the mindfulness practice anymore. And the reality is that I always call it toilet paper goals. Anybody in the audience who has taken a presentation with me has probably heard me talk about this, which is we don't go to the grocery store. And I had this analogy before COVID. I would just like to say thank you very much. We don't go to the grocery store and buy one package of toilet paper and come home and that's it. And we never have to buy toilet paper again. We have to keep going back and buying toilet paper just as much as with mindfulness. Part of it is we're not Buddhist monks. We're not going to reach this state where every moment of every day is mindful. And so we need the practice. You need the practice if you want to keep living your life in that mindful way. You need that practice to keep coming back to, because I think part of it is this expectation that if I take this 10-week course on mindfulness, then every moment I'm going to be present for. And it doesn't work that way. You're always honing that skill.
Yes, just like any other skill. So if you play the guitar or the piano, you don't play for a year, you're going to be rusty.
Yeah.
Right? And even Buddhist monks, even my teacher has said to me, I know that I haven't been meditating enough when I begin to suffer. And so the idea is to first be aware of your suffering, and then to just begin to think about mindfulness, the theory of it, etc. Try some meditations, like meditation scripts that you can listen to that make you feel peaceful. But then we always want to do the meditations without the script, because that's where the training comes in our brain, right? And what happens is you begin slowly over time, just like any other behavior change. The best way to do it is in small pieces over time, where you notice in certain situations you're less reactive than perhaps you were before. And that's what begins to bring us back, which is this idea that I feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say I feel better, we're really saying I feel more peaceful. I feel more in control of my own life, of the way I'm thinking. People often describe this as feeling very powerful in their own life, because they're finally, their emotions aren't in charge. Their reactivity isn't in charge. They're in charge. They're controlling the way they think about things.
Do you find, and I'm looking at the clock and I realize we're running out of time, and I said this before we met, I said, we're not going to get to all these questions. And I did not know how right I was going to be, because I think we got to like one question. And I know somebody in the chat has a question, and I just want you to know, I will make sure that we get to that, because it's a short question. Do you find, as you're talking, I think part of, the challenge where people can try it like briefly and then be like, nope, can't do it, is there is the potential for there be a speed bump. Because if you're going to meditate, you really have to sit with yourself. And there's no numbing, there's no distraction, there's no dissociating from your feelings. You really have to be with yourself. And that doesn't even mean that you're being mindful. I'm just saying you're kind of stuck with yourself. Like wherever you go, there you are. But we can fill up a lot so that we don't have to examine, we don't have to experience the discomfort of some of our self-talk, the discomfort of some of our emotions that we may not have a tolerance built up for. So some of it is when you're practicing it, there may be the speed bump of discomfort, of distress, of like, here I am, and this is all of the noise that's going on. These are all the directions that I'm being pulled in, and in a different way than maybe in your daily life, where you're distracted, but then you're in your head, but then you're distracted by something that's going on. Like it's this sort of focused attention where you have to almost make peace with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a huge part of the practice is a practice called love and kindness, or loving kindness, which is called the metta meditation. And that, so often we are very judgmental of our own feelings. And that practice helps us be loving and compassionate toward ourselves, primarily, with the idea that, again, if we're loving and compassionate to ourselves, we're better able to be loving and compassionate to others.
Mm-hmm.
We are open to connection with others, which we know is such a basic, important human need, a requirement, actually. And that if we operate out of a heart of love and compassion, that is transformative for all of us, right? It's just hard to get there if you've got a lot of stuff going on, like what in the field they call it armoring. We build up an armor that distances us not only from ourselves, but the world and others. And mindfulness seeks to bring us all together with the idea that we are all connected energetically.
Yeah.
Having said that, often in the description that you described, I started feeling like alarmed because it described almost trauma. And in that case, if you are a trauma survivor of some sort, knowingly or unknowingly, and you begin to have these I call them screams, right? Which is like this welling up of an emotion that's like, like a wave that totally overwhelms you. You should call one of us.
Yeah.
And that can work through that, particularly someone who's experienced with trauma, can work through that with you in conjunction with your mindfulness practice, so that you can begin to work through. And that's another important concept in mindfulness, is the idea of working through, not suppressing, not denying, not going around, not avoiding, but going through. And we learn how to do that through our meditations and learning about mindfulness. We learn how to develop coping mechanisms and tolerance of our feelings, which a lot of times is really important for us, because a lot of times we don't learn that as children.
Well, and I think the piece that you just said is, reflected in just that biological imperative of connection with other people. And if you're with yourself and that is so overwhelming, you may not have learned the tools to self-regulate. And before
Correct.
we can learn to self-regulate, we have to be in a position to co-regulate. And I think that is where, as you're saying, connecting with a therapist that can give you the experience of co-regulation is going to prepare your system just from a biological perspective to allow you to then be more successful with the mindfulness practice, the self-regulation part of the mindfulness practice on your own. Okay, so we have 2 minutes. I have to tell you, like, I'm not stressed, but I'm just sad because I'm just like, there's so much to talk about and I'm so excited, but we only have 45 minutes. So for those in your audience, we're going to come back again, right? If you're on Facebook Live, what you got to do is say, bring Debbie back, bring Debbie back. But there is a really quick question. Somebody said, was referring at the very beginning, you referred to your favorite type of meditation. Can you say the name of that again? I think it is like a historic name for what we now call mindfulness.
Correct. It's called Vipassana. It is the style of meditation that and refers to insight meditation. And if you look online, the first meditation that you want to start with is a mindfulness-based breathing meditation. And but really, the best way to learn about this is actually to come to the class that I teach at the Cancer Wellness Center. Our first class to Intro to Mindfulness, it's a 6-week class, 1-hour sessions each time, will be on May 4th. And
Tuesday.
Tuesday, May 4th at 4 p.m. And it'll run 6 weeks consecutively. If you're interested in learning more about mindfulness, we'll introduce all of these concepts in the class.
And it's a webinar. How easy? Zero commute time. Zero commute time, people. So sign up today. Spaces are limited, right? I mean, I'm being serious though. We only, in that class, is it open unlimited, or do we try to cap it at a certain amount?
We cap it, but I don't remember what that is.
Okay. So if you're listening, you're interested, go online, register for it, May 4th through the second week of June, I think, May 4th through June 8th, Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Debbie, such a pleasure to talk to you. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Such a pleasure to have you here with me today. So appreciate the conversation. So interesting to me to hear you. And I'm sure that the audience also enjoyed hearing your eloquence and expertise. So I appreciate it. And I am going to want you to come back again so we can talk about mindful eating and all the other things, where to start. Although people can come and see you on May 4th for 6 weeks to learn some of that too.
They sure can. Thank you too.
And thank you everybody for being here. Those of you on Zoom, those of you watching on Facebook Live, thank you if you joined us afterwards on YouTube. I will be back here next month on May 19th, joined by Donna Oldenburg, our bereavement coordinator. So stay tuned for that. Take care and be well. Bye-bye.